The political crisis in Venezuela has reached a fever pitch and seems only to be getting worse. With the threat of economic and social institutional collapse and the nation in chaos, people are facing an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. Numerous families live below the poverty line in what was once the richest country in South America. What has happened to Venezuela? What impact will events there have internationally? And what's behind the upheaval in Latin America? To discuss these issues and more, I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Wang Weijun, an independent researcher on Latin American studies, and Hafiz Odin, senior fellow at the China for China Globalization. We shall also talk to Charles Tang, chairman of the Brazil-China Chamber of Commerce and Industry, via phone call in Sao Paulo. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to our discussion here. Weijun, first of all, as a senior expert of Latin American studies, you have stayed in Latin America for years. What do you think, in your estimation, will be the worst case scenario?
No, actually, I think, Ray, now the Venezuela situation is critical now, because from the years I saw a lot of immigrants from Venezuela into Brazil. And these people, they identify them as refugees. You know, refugees of poverty and hunger in South America is something out of my imagination. But the people told me about the economy of the Venezuela is practically dead, I think. And the reason, maybe, I think the three main reasons. The first is the dramatic the price low of the oil, and the second is the blockade or the sanction by the U.S., and the third, that's obvious, that's poor administration of Maduro's regime.
Well, the general picture about the economic performance is one thing. The worst case scenario may possibly cover a military coup, ouster of President Maduro, like what happened when the people in Ukraine chose to take sides with NATO and Americans and engineered the ouster of their former president Viktor Yanukovych. What do you think of the different kinds of a scenario?
I think it's very likely that the United States, who is pushing unashamedly for regime change, is doing all it can to change the regime, hopefully peacefully, but by other means if necessary. So the United States and its allies have gotten 50% of IMF, World Bank members to back the alternate regime of the National Assembly president. So there's some possibility that there could be a peaceful change, but I think there's more possibility that it won't be peaceful. And I think China plays a pivotal role in this. And just yesterday, the National Assembly president made a plea via Bloomberg to China, asking China to come over to his side, if you want to call it that, because his people deserve better, and also that Venezuela will honor all its international commitments. I mean, let's face it, China has lent Venezuela tens of billions of dollars and must be a little bit worried at this point about if they're going to get their investment back or not.
Talking about the alleged meddling or intervention, quote unquote, do you think China has reasons to question the intention of Secretary Pompeo, who accused China of destroying Venezuelan economy? Because if we, as Harvey suggested earlier, did live up to the expectations of the spokesperson of the National Assembly, then domestically, Chinese authorities may be viewed by the audience and the netizens as weak in the standoff, as the first to blink in the standoff. What do you think of the quiet competitions between China and the United States over Venezuela?
No, but I think Mr. Mike Pompeo make very wrong pronunciation about the question, because first you have to respect the choice of the Venezuelan people. And,
but the Venezuelan people were seriously divided, and they are still quite divided Many support the opposition leader.
But no, really, I insist
and the military
that,
pledge loyalty to the president at this moment.
no, I still insist that Maduro is the elected president, and he now still has the legitimacy in the power. That's why I think I think the Chinese government's policy, this Latin America's policy is up to now is right, because
Very consistent, non-interference.
Yeah,
Respecting international norms.
exactly.
But many people question whether the election itself was fair. So I don't think that you can take as a given that the election was fair. So I think that this is something that needs to be considered. And also, I do think it's unfair for the Secretary of State Pompeo to say that this was the Venezuelan government's own doing, that I think China was involved. China may have propped up the regime by giving it a lot of money and making those kinds of deals with it. But it's Maduro, who a failed bus driver, who also a failed president, who's driven his country into a black hole, an economic black hole.
The U.S. has sanctioned over $3 billion of the Venezuelan government's business assets to help opposition leader Juan Guaido. Parallels have been drawn between Syria and Venezuela. The U.S. government attitudes and actions towards Maduro are remarkably similar to previous views of Assad, the Syrian president, and his predicted fall. So could the Venezuela crisis lead to the same kind of situation in Syria, where we saw very serious humanitarian crisis?
No, I don't believe that Venezuela will become another Syria. Even the United States don't want to see another Syria in Latin America, because to maintain the stability in Latin America, I think this is priority. This is priority. No, for sure that United States don't like Maduro at all. And now what I'm afraid is that the aid from the international society being used as a political instrument, and it is, look, seemingly is very likely. And I think in different scenarios, the stability of Venezuela is the most important. And I do think that Venezuela will not be another Syria for many other reasons. One of them, if it is the difference between the two forces are quite big. There is a big gap between the opposition and the government, because Maduro is grasping the military forces, and another is because of the geopolitics. The scenario is quite different. South America, Latin America is not like Middle East, where the Middle East can happen a lot of multi-parties intervention, but it will not happen in Latin America.
Well, what about the Lima
agree
group?
With that,
what about the Lima group? Tell me first of all the Lima group. It has 16 members that support, you know, the Guaido government. Yes.
Yeah, but you know, it was never a war inside Latin America. I think the society of the Latin America countries is very united, and the negotiation.
They are united against President Maduro or against the self-appointed president?
No, but it will never. I don't believe that there will be a war inside Latin America.
And what do you think of the possibility of having a proxy war in Venezuela?
Well, I worry about this, that we haven't spoken about Russia. And Russia is there. It has military equipment there. I kind of worry about a Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0. I worry about the fact that the Russians, who stock in trade in part is going around the world making trouble, will exploit this situation and turn what is a bad situation into a catastrophe, perhaps. I think this is the real joker in the Venezuelan card.
And what about the strong support provided by Havana, Cuba? Because for a long time, Havana has remained a staunch ally of Venezuela, starting from Hugo Chavez, who was the leader of the Venezuela revolution. What do you think of the military advisors and even fighting personnel from Cuba to support President Maduro?
I consider the Cubans and the Russians to be on the same page on this and to be allies as well. And so that is a concern for sure.
Right. I forgot to tell one thing, because we saw that the recent Russian forces move into Venezuela. If anything happened in Venezuela, the Russians will certainly take one more step forward. And this is a guarantee their presence in the South America. This is what America, the United States don't want to see.
But then, do you think there's yet another missile crisis?
No.
Like what happened in 1962?
In a recent report, in a study I wrote about the Cuban participation in the region's affairs, I do believe that the Cuban will not so active.
Will not be so active?
Huh?
You don't think Cuba will be so active?
No. Because Cuba now, with the shifting of the leadership, now the Cubans' priority is to develop their economy, and to. But unfortunately, Mr. Trump, stopped the process.
Mostly stopped, but didn't stop it completely.
Yeah, the process started by Mr. Obama.
President
Obama. But I think the Cuban, from the information that I have, the Cubans now has the priority to develop their economy. They do not want to be involved in the conflict.
But I'm afraid, Harvey, do you agree that the hostile policy of the Trump administration will somehow push Cubans to the side of Venezuela? I mean, President Maduro. Because the Cuban government certainly does want to prioritize domestic economic reconstruction over any military assistance to Venezuela. However, what about the haunting specter that the Cubans might be forcefully pushed to President Maduro's side?
Oh, I think it's not likely, but I think it's certainly very possible that it could occur, because the Cubans have a very strong ideological background and bent. This is why they've supported Venezuela for so long, and they could push back if the U.S. pushes hard enough, yes.
Another thing, Cuba is in the Venezuela side, not because of the ideology. That I agree with Harvey. Another thing, that Venezuela is supplying all the oil supply of the Cuban is from Venezuela.
You mean most of the energy export goes to Cuba. In return, do you think Cubans provide Venezuelans with medical supplies, medicine, Medicare?
Yes.
That's a very reciprocal, mutually beneficial process of cooperation between these two economies. Let's look at the traditional idea of a Monroe Doctrine. Now, it seems President Obama has created a vision, if not illusion, that Monroe Doctrine was over. And Joseph Biden or John Kerry said that Monroe Doctrine was a joke in the 21st century. However, when President Trump took office, he wanted to do anything but Obama. He wanted to do anything against what President Obama stood for. In this case, a humble president like Obama, who wanted to reverse the Monroe Doctrine, might face the immediate danger of having the Monroe Doctrine back in the so-called backyard of the United States. What do you think?
Well, John Kerry is the one who said that the Monroe Doctrine was dead. The Monroe Doctrine just celebrated its 195th birthday, if doctrines can have birthdays. So the world looked a lot different 195 years ago. The Monroe Doctrine basically said to European powers at that time, stay out of Latin America. This is our sphere of influence.
But John Bolton, the hawkish national security advisor to President Trump, said, please stay away from Venezuela. He was obviously talking to some of the outside powers, like, for example, Russia, China, who made a heavy investment in the energy and infrastructure, perhaps. So can that be compared to Monroe Doctrine?
Well, it is the Monroe Doctrine. It is the Monroe Doctrine.
So Monroe Doctrine is not dead. It's rekindled, it's kept alive by the new team of the White House?
It's kept alive, especially, I believe, to negate China's power in Latin America. The United States is very concerned about China's power and about inroads made by the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a great initiative, and China is making great inroads. America doesn't like that.
Right, but you know, not talking about the Monroe Doctrine, but I do think the United States should review their policies about Latin America, because actually the United States could play a very, very important role in that region, because the people are more linked with the culture, and the United States have everything that the Latin America needs: technology and investment, education aid, and medical systems support, everything. But now the situation is quite critical. The poverty and the underdevelopment of Latin America, I think the United States should be partially responsible for that. If you insist, if you underline that you are influence over the region. But if the United States change the policies, the illegal immigrants and the drug problems could be solved in great parts.
Already the European Union has shown signs of a big regrets over the case of Libya. Because of the proactive military intervention, this country fell apart with the tribal groups fighting each other, and also Syria is no exception. The crisis of refugees plagued the continental Europe. With this in mind, do you think American policymakers should be very, very careful about whether they would create yet another refugee crisis?
Of course, they should be careful, but usually we're not so careful, and we have terrible situations that result. We have a very checkered record when it comes to Latin America. You know, it was our famous writer, O. Henry, who coined the term banana republic. A banana republic is basically a country in Latin America that's controlled by a corporation which is doing the bidding of the American government, and maybe there's a very thin veneer of democracy or some kind of self-rule. We have done very bad things in Latin America, and we still haven't woken up yet.
Harvey, as a major of American literature in the early 1980s in Shanghai Foreign Studies University, may I cite Ernest Hemingway as saying farewell weapons. So that could also be a punchline to characterize what Americans could do positively to help stabilize the situation, not only in Venezuela, but across the whole continent of Latin America. Let me go to Charles Tang, who's standing by in Sao Paulo, is now talking with us on the phone. Hello, Charles. What are your thoughts on the worst-case scenario?
How are you? Hello?
Hello, Charles. What do you think should be the worst-case scenario in Venezuela? Do you think there will be very devastating humanitarian crisis, including military coup, civil strife like what happened in Syria? What do you think?
I think that there is a humanitarian crisis going on. I think there will be a military coup because, you know, the Venezuelan army is fairly well on the side of Mr. Maduro, and he has a lot of Cuban advisors also who keeps check on everything. So I think that, you know, Latin America is growing a Chinese garden. And like I said some years ago in my article for the World Policy Institute in New York, because the United States during the Bush years ignored Latin America because they were concentrated on the Middle East. And now, with the cutting of the aid to three major Central American countries, of course, it also doesn't help. And we have to realize that Brazil, Argentina, and countries like these United States is really competition, while China is the client. So if the United States sells more soybeans to China, Brazil will sell less, and vice versa. So I think that with this present attitude of the U.S. government, it can only keep Latin America further away from a partnership with the United States. Although the present president of Brazil is a fan of the United States, he realized once he became president that Brazil and China are strategic partners, that Brazil needs the investment from China and needs to sell its products to China.
So the strong argument by the Chinese government is that our investment in BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, may help promote interconnectivity, livelihoods of ordinary folks in Venezuela instead of destabilizing them. Now, let's look at the worst-case scenario. I'm aware that during Kofi Annan's years as UN chief and at the height of the Iraq War, there was the Oil for Food project to help avert the worst humanitarian crisis against the underprivileged, the ordinary and the rank-and-file Iraqis. Do you think similar things will happen, or the other way around, because the United States will block all, the energy lifeline of Venezuela? Venezuela depends on oil exports for maintaining the military, loyalty of which is so important for maintaining the leadership of Maduro.
The United States is playing the hardest of hardball here, and I believe they'll do everything in their power to produce a regime change, even if it means the loss of many human lives. Because in the master game of world politics and world domination, the hardliners in the White House in America want that regime to change, and as you can see, every step that they take is directed in that way. So I don't think we're going to see much humanitarian gestures coming out of the United States, because if we did, they would have been done already. The amount of inflation in Venezuela now, it's incalculable. It's in the millions of percent annually. And one very interesting statistic is it is now cheaper to use Venezuelan currency as toilet paper than to go out and buy the toilet paper itself. I mean, it's a kind of off-color example, but it shows the severity of the situation that people are living under.
Very much like the severity of the economic situation, particularly devaluation of the currency in in Zimbabwe a couple of years back. Let me go back to Charlestown. I wonder if the United Nations, particularly the Security Council, has hosted any emergency session to discuss the very dangerous situation in Venezuela. Charles, is it possible for P5 of the UN Security Council to reach a consensus about providing Venezuela with humanitarian crisis? Let me go back to the issue of oil for food. Is that possible? Is that one of the viable options on the table for the international community? Charles?
Absolutely. I think that if China and Russia helped Venezuela's oil industry to become more efficient, then of course Venezuela could have much more oil and trade this oil for other goods such as food and medicine, which the country desperately needs. With intervention in the United States, I think that as long as Russia has troops in Venezuela, I think that may be a bit more difficult for the United States to go ahead and promote some kind of a military measure or overthrow of the Maduro government. Of course, with the populist policies of the Chavistas have transformed just about the richest country in South America into the poorest. However, like I said, like you said, Venezuela still has a lot of oil. The efficiency of extracting this oil has been reduced, because of the old equipment and politics. But if China and Russia can help produce oil more efficiently and a greater amount, I'm sure Venezuela can do something with this oil to benefit the dire needs of its people.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you, Wei-Jin and Harvey. Let's take a look at the broad picture concerning the economy of Latin America, or Organization of Americas. Back in the late 1980s and early 1990s region, neoliberal policies were widely adopted in Latin America. What have the consequences been for countries such as Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Peru, and others? What are the lessons for Latin American countries in taking reform forward?
It's a very interesting phenomenon, Ray, because all the Latin America in the economy area, the Chicago schools is the most fashionable and most famous. And interestingly, that in most countries it fails, but it has a great success in Chile. But what the conclusion that I took is that there is no doctrine or no theory universal for all the countries.
One size cannot fit all.
No, but never. And
no
Chile,
universal therapy.
Yeah, Chile is nowadays Chile is the openest and the most active economy in South America, and stable. And one thing, it is the most free commerce, has the most free commerce in South America. I think that this is a triumph of the free commerce over the isolation and the blockade.
Harvey, neoliberalism took upper hand in the wake of the Cold War, but it seems to be losing the momentum. In the wake of the Cold War, shock therapy did succeed in Poland, but it failed in a very serious way in Russia. President Yeltsin failed to adopt a very good therapy. Shock therapy turned out to be a disaster for the federal Russia. So what do you think of any therapy for the economy in this continent?
I think it has to be done on a country-by-country basis. Right now, you have 90% of the countries in South America either right or far right. That is leading to greater income inequality and eventually to greater stress by right versus left or poor versus rich. It's not a good sign.
Well, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, accused China of destroying Venezuela. Does it mean the descending of an iron curtain in the far forefront in Latin America? We'll wait to see. We'll let the bullets fly for a while. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.